Good morning. Last week we began a new sermon series on the life of Abraham. And in this series we're looking at Abraham's life through the lens of discipleship. Abraham was the first person in the scriptures that God came to and said, "Come and follow me." And so we're looking at Abraham as the first disciple. And whenever we look at his life through that lens, it allows us to reconnect to what discipleship really is. Because each week his story adds a new layer for understanding what this life of faith really looks like. So last week, Abram was called by God into a new life. Abram gathered his family. He packed up. He left his old life behind and he entered into a new one. But this one started with a 1,000-mile journey from Haran to Canaan. It's taught us how the call of God is something that we have to answer every day. Abraham began by learning to answer that call each day, learning to live by faith each day, and learn to put one foot in front of the other each day. And in today's passage, Abram finally arrives in Canaan. But then the story slows down because it wants us to see something. It wants us to see these altars that Abram built at Shechem and Bethel. And it's here at this part of the story that adds a new layer to our understanding of discipleship. Because as we watch Abram build these altars, it's showing us what worship really is. But first, we should at least recognize how worship has become so diluted in our modern Christian culture. It's been reduced down to just being a worship service where we gather and we sing some songs. And at the same time, that worship service itself has been diluted as well. It's become trivialized because there's just been a slow exchange of values over time. To where the blueprint for worship is no longer the scriptures, the blueprint is shaped by secular values. The world got in. Perhaps it's all just become another distraction to true worship. Because over time, the focus has shifted from being missional to being attractional. So it's no longer about sending people out, it's about drawing people in. But then once it becomes about attractional, then the spiritual gets replaced by spectacle. And then once you prioritize spectacle, it becomes about experience. And then once it becomes about experience, you lose transcendence. And when you lose transcendence, you lose God. Why? Because all that's left is worship that's merely a reflection of us. How can you have transcendence if everything is built on our own preference? And so, of course, we're left with people looking for something more because they were offered something that looked no different in the end than the surrounding world. How is Jesus pleased when people come with all of their cares and concerns, and instead of offering them a cross, we offer them cotton candy? What you think about worship is important because our worship reveals what we think about God and His place in our lives. Every church, in every time and in every place, has to answer the question, are we worshiping the living God or a God of our own making? What you think about worship reveals what you think about God. This next part of Abraham's story calls us into a deeper understanding of worship. Where worship is not just about a service. Worship is offering our lives in service to God because He's worthy. And these altars are at the beginning of Abram's story, because God wanted him to learn worship at the beginning of his discipleship journey. So what do these altars teach us about worship? We pick up the story as Abram arrives in Canaan after a 1,000-mile road trip. Now, this was a family road trip. And so, of course, this went like every other family road trip in the history of humanity. They started off with everything so neatly organized and packed in the back of the cars. They look forward to what lies ahead, but by the time they get there, they pull in on fumes, fast food wrappers covering the floorboards. One of the tires is low, check engine light on. Little smoke coming out from underneath the hood, and it smells like something is burning. But they made it. Now just think about what this road trip would have been like. Yeah, there's lots of exhaustion, of course. But I want you to think about the growing sense of anticipation. Because remember the extraordinary promises that God made to Abram. Just listen to them again. Abram, I want you to go to a land that I will show you. And I will make you a great nation. I will bless you and make your name great so that you will be a blessing. And in you, all of the families of the earth shall be blessed. Those are crazy, wild promises. Abram's life had been interrupted by a God who was so generous and benevolent towards him. And so, of course, as this road trip progressed, Abram would imagine how incredible and extraordinary this land must be, and that anticipation had to only grow with each passing day. But then they arrive in Shechem. This is where the story gets interesting. Now, the text is written in a way where the author assumes that the reader knows more than we actually know. It's written directly to people that understood the geography. And so notice how it identifies this location. Because it says that Abraham arrived at the place at Shechem. It doesn't say a place, it says the place. It doesn't say a place called Shechem. It says that he arrived at the place at Shechem. And the author assumes the reader knows what this place is, because he uses a specific word when it says the place. It's a cultic word. That means that this was a religious site. It was the place of a well-known altar. But this place is also identified by a specific tree called the oak of Mamre. And then it tells you who this religious site belongs to. Because after that, it immediately says there were Canaanites in the land. Now let's put all this together and make sense of it. Abram was a Babylonian. Where he comes from, they were known for their stargazing and their sorcery. But now Abram is brought to a place that is inhabited by a people that were known for something completely different. Now he's in the land of the Canaanites. And the Canaanites were a savage, barbaric people that were known for the brutality of their sacrifices. Now Abram is in the land of the gods of Molech, Baal, and Asherah. Gods that required human sacrifice, child sacrifice, blood, self-mutilation, and sexual perversion of every kind. He just walked into the land of Sodom and Gomorrah. And so when Abram came to the place at Shechem, He walked into a demonic stronghold displayed in Canaanite religion that was built on savagery, debauchery, and human sacrifice. So, there is no telling what Abram saw at that altar. The bones, the blood, the smell. I think some of you can understand how Abram might have felt. He probably felt the same way you did when you walked into the Kaligat, where with your eyes you could see the altars and the reality of their worship. But in your spirit, you felt what your eyes could not see. You felt the hostility. Like there was a massive, invisible sign that was blinking. You are not welcome. It's because, like Abram, you walked into a place where hell and earth meet. And then the Lord says, we're here. This is the place. You've arrived. It says the Lord appeared to Abram. And it's actually the first time in the scriptures that it says that the Lord appeared to someone. And so as Abram is looking around and taking it all in, the Lord appears to him and said, Abram, this is it. To your offspring I will give this land. I think when Abram saw everything around him, he was unsettled and disturbed. That's why God appeared to him in that place and said, Abram, don't focus on all of this. Look at me. I am here. I am with you. Remember my promises. And that's when Abram built an altar and he worshiped. It was in this place where he learned worship for the first time. But then the Lord moved him on and he went further south, deeper into the heart of Canaan. So maybe in Abraham's mind when he left, he's thinking that maybe Shechem was just an isolated event, just a rough part of town that he doesn't have to deal with. But then the Lord brought him to Bethel, which was another place of Canaanite worship devoted to the god El. And I think reality struck. He realized Shechem was not an isolated case, and I think Abram felt desperation. Why? Because it says that he built another altar and he called upon the name of the Lord. He called on the name of the Lord. He cried out and he cast himself upon the Lord. He worshiped. So what are we to learn from this story? And what does it have to do with you? What does it have to do with your worship? You know, to find those answers, we have to read these stories spiritually. In stories like this, there are no imperatives. It doesn't give us any commands. It doesn't say, Abraham built an altar, therefore go into your backyard and build an altar. You have to look more deeply. And so we have to read these stories spiritually because they are teaching us something. This story is teaching us something. So I want us to see at least two things. Remember, when God called Abram, he made those wild, incredible promises that went against everything that Abram had probably planned for his life and went against everything that Abram probably thought was possible for his life. But he trusted, and he got up, packed up, and he began that journey of faith, and he learned to answer that call every day, and he put one foot in front of the other, and he was growing each day as he did, being built up in his faith. But now it's time for the next lesson. Because when Abram got to Canaan, and he came to Shechem and then Bethel, He realized he was not coming to some blank slate, empty paradise where he could relax. This land was occupied by hostility. And Abram learned that this life of faith was not going to be easy because it was going to play out inside of a dark and dangerous world. But secondly, Abram learned what worship really is. It was in that dark and hostile place that God appeared to him and said, "This is the place. This is the place of my promises. This is the place I claim for me, for you. This is the land that I will give your offspring." But it didn't look like it. When Abram looked around him, faith in those promises got a whole lot harder. He wished that he could go back to when all he had to do was put one foot in front of the other each day and put up his tent and take it down. Life was easier. Now it got harder. How can God's promises be true in a place like this? How can I be a blessing here? How could I be great here? How could my family survive here? But this is where we see the deeper heart of worship. Because in the midst of everything he sees around him, amidst his own sense of fear and desperation and confusion, Abram built that altar and called on the name of the Lord. He worshiped. So understanding all that context helps us to see what worship really is. Abram is entrusting his life to the Lord. His worship is saying, "I trust that you are with me. I don't understand, but I trust that you will stay true to your word. You are worthy of my trust, and I offer you my life. I put my life in your hands." And so this disciple learns very quickly that the only way he's going to make it through is by worship. The only way he's going to make it through this hostile world is if he entrusts his life to the Lord. This is worship. So what about us? We all envision the life of faith being easier than it actually is. And yet, aren't we constantly confronted with the fact that this life of faith and trusting in God's promises plays out in a hostile and malevolent world that is not for you? But it's also a deceptive world. Because this life of faith plays out in a dangerous world because it presents so many alternatives. Because just like Abram, you are surrounded by altars. Because this world doesn't just present you with options for your life. It presents you with altars. It presents to you places of sacrifice that say, this is what's worthy of your life. This is what's worthy of your trust. This is what's worth devoting your life to. This is how you will make it through. Abraham now lived in a place where all those pagan altars made all the same promises as the Lord. Those altars would say, "No, Abram, this is how you will be great. This is how you will be blessed. This is how you can have this land and make this place your home." Abram's life of faith meant that he had to learn to worship the Lord his God in a world that wasn't just dangerous. It was also deceptive. Because he lived in a world that would now offer him so many different alternatives. And if you fast forward the story, this is why Israel failed throughout the rest of the Old Testament. They never learned to worship the Lord. They kept worshiping these very gods at these very altars and trusting in their promises instead. They couldn't stop going to other altars and offering their lives in the hope that they would receive the blessings they desired and greatness on their terms, not on God's terms. And their worship just became an expression of their own preference. And so what this story does is it allows us to see our lives in a very simple way. Because it boils your life down to a very simple question. Which altar will you worship at? Is it the altar of the Lord, or is it the altars of this world? What will you give your life to? We all worship something. We all determine that something is worth our life. But if all we do is just think of worship as a service where we come and sing some songs and we miss the deeper reality of what worship really is, because you'll just think, well, I go to Christian worship services. I don't go to Hindu services. I don't go to Muslim services, so obviously I'm good. But this story invites you to think more deeply about what worship really is, because it's asking, no, what are you giving your life to? What are you trusting to get you through? What are you giving your body, your mind, your heart, your energy, your trust, your time? What are you saying is worthy of your life? And that makes worship take on a whole new meaning, because that's a question that we have to answer every single day. Because this Abraham story is teaching us that we live in the exact same world. It is a world that begs for your worship. It's a world that presents you with so many different alternatives, because it's a world that presents to you so many different altars upon which you can come and sacrifice your life. Altars that say, this is how you will be blessed. This is how you will be secure in this world. This is how you will be great. This is how you will be safe. This is how you can provide for your children. This is how you can belong and make your home here. This world offers you the altars of your career, your business, your financial portfolio, and says this is how you'll be blessed if only you'd offer your energy and your time and your investment and your attention, and it's worthy of laying everything else to the side. This world offers altars of status, image, notoriety, and offering you a name that is great if only you would conform and trust its voice. This world offers the altars of materialism, wealth, and comfort if only you would trust that it can help calm all of your anxieties. Those altars ask for your trust. They ask you to reorganize your life. They ask you to rearrange your priorities. They determine when you get up and when you go to sleep. They ask you to sacrifice time with your kids, your spouse, your friendships, and your God. They ask for your health, your best years, and your bank account. This world offers all sorts of altars that say, come and offer your life. And so if all we do is just think of worship as a worship service, and we will come to worship on a Sunday thinking that we are just fine, but all that does is obscure what's really captivated all of our heart, soul, mind, and strength. And we won't see the altars of our true worship. The altars to which we have come, bowed and told, you are worthy of my life, and all that I have is yours. But those altars only take. They never give. It's because they make promises they can't keep. But Christian, your God has provided a better altar. It's not an altar that you have to build yourself. It's an altar that He built for you. And it's actually buried in this passage. Because when Abram first entered the land, he came to Shechem. And this was where Abram first learned worship. And he learned worship at a place that was identified by an altar, a tree, and the appearance of the Lord. This is where he learned what worship really is, and so do we. Because do you know where else you find those three things together? It's Calvary. Because there your God carried a cross. And that cross was a tree. And that tree became an altar when he crawled upon it. And upon that altar, when it was lifted up, is the appearance, the revelation of the Lord your God. And this is where we learn worship. Because Jesus turned that altar into a memorial. He memorialized his sacrifice on the altar of the cross here, right here in the Lord's Supper. That's where that altar and that tree and the appearance of the Lord are woven together, and it's where we learn worship. And he says, do this in remembrance of me, in remembrance of my promises and my sacrifice. And here at this church, we believe that Christ is truly present with us in this meal. We come and we eat bread and wine physically, but as we come by faith, Christ feeds us spiritually, where he strengthens our soul for the journey ahead. And so this is why each Sunday you should be here, because Christ is here. It's so much more than a service, because each Sunday he calls us out of our homes. He calls us out of this world and away from all of its altars, and he prepares a table for us in the presence of our enemies. He prepares a table for us in the presence of our circumstances. He prepares a table before us in the presence of our fears and our anxieties. And this table reminds us that even though we live in a dark and malevolent world, he is with us. When we're afraid and confused and struggle to believe that his promises could be true, this table says that he is with us. When it feels as though the world is winning, this one reminds us of the one who holds the keys of death and Hades. It reminds us of the one who disarmed the demonic powers and humiliated them and left them in open shame. The one who overcame the world and made us citizens of another world, because yet, while we were still sinners, Christ died for us. And just like Abram, we need the Lord to appear to us and to speak to us. And this table is where Jesus says to you, don't look around and focus on everything else. Look at me. I am here. And I am with you. And this table says that when you look at everything around this world, and you look at that night sky and all of those stars, it's this table that says it's yours. But this table is also where we learn worship. Because it's where we remember that this Christian life isn't just about what Jesus provided for us, it's also about what he requires of us. To not offer our lives on an altar, but to offer our lives to him. To offer our lives as a free will offering, as a response of thanksgiving and gratitude. That's why Paul says to offer yourselves then as a living sacrifice, holy and acceptable to God, for this is your spiritual worship. We offer our lives because he's worthy. And it's here at this table that he says, I gave you my life, now give me yours. And we actually remind ourselves of this every Sunday in our liturgy at the Lord's Supper. Do you know why we say, the Lord be with you, and also with you. Lift up your hearts. We lift them up to the Lord. Let us give thanks to the Lord our God. It is right to give our thanks and praise. The church has said those words at communion for almost 2,000 years. As each church had to learn to make its way through this world. Because it's here that we are reminding ourselves of what this table means for us and how to come to it appropriately, and to remember of what it requires of us to offer ourselves as living sacrifices, wholly devoted unto the Lord, because He is worthy. And this table is where we remember that the only way that we are going to make it through is by worship. And so we say, the Lord be with you, and also with you, because we are reminding each other that the Lord, our God, is with us. It's a statement of blessing over each other, that no matter how you come in here or what you are facing in your life, the Lord, our God, is with us. And then we say, lift up your hearts. We lift them up to the Lord because we are declaring and recognizing that the only response is to offer our lives, to entrust our lives to this God who would be so generous and benevolent towards us. And then we say, let us give thanks to the Lord our God. It is right to give our thanks and praise because it's the only reasonable thing we have left to give. Every other altar in this world says that you will finally get everything once you give everything. But this table says that you've already been given everything. And so it's no loss to give everything in return. And so once we say all of that, the only thing left is to come to the table, to eat and drink, and say, my life for the glory of Christ and the life of the world. Let's pray. Lord Jesus, we come to you this morning with the request and desire that you would captivate our hearts, that you would reveal to us those altars in our life where we come and we give things that belong to you and to you alone. Would you show us how empty they are? Would you show us how empty they've left us? And would you draw us unto yourself? Would you teach us how to take that trust that we've misplaced and to place it back upon you? And might we take the first step this morning as we come to your table, and we ask that you would strengthen us and feed us for the journey that lies ahead. We thank you for your generosity and your benevolence towards us. And we recognize the only reasonable response that such a gift requires. Would you give us the grace and the strength to offer it? We ask this in your precious name.